Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Kilayim. We're up to Perek Dal Mishnah Aleph. I want to preface by saying that I will be using the Art Scroll Mishnayot elucidated and its notes in order to try to say the Mishnah as clearly as possible with the commentaries. Also, I highly encourage people, if you have the book, to look at the diagrams. They have several diagrams for the following two Mishnayot that we will be doing. They clear up the Mishnah very well. It really helps for visual learners. Rabotai, the previous three Mishnayot, previous three chapters that we discussed in this Sechet spoke about the laws of Kilayim of seeds, which is mixtures of grains, beans, vegetables. The next four chapters are going to speak about Kilayim of the vineyard, seeds planted in or next to a vineyard. It's a special prohibition. The Torah said it separately, Kilayim of the vineyard. It applies only to grain and vegetables that are planted in or next to a vineyard. However, there is no issur to plant fruit-bearing trees in a vineyard. That's how the Rambam in the Serchot Kilayim, chapter 5, Halacha 6, explains it. Now, the Torah says the Kilayim of a vineyard as a separate prohibition, and it has separate rules. One of the rules is that grain and vegetables have to be separated from a vineyard by 4 amot. And Tarshim explain why 4 amot. 4 amot of empty space around the vineyard is considered the work area of the vineyard, meaning it's the area that you need for the grower to bring the oxen to plow the ground around the grapevines and to walk with the wagon and oxen to harvest the grapes. So this is the rule for planting next to a vineyard. However, if someone wants to plant another species in the middle of the vineyard, the rules are stricter. That's what the Mishnah is going to discuss, meaning if you want to plant something after a vineyard, it has to be separated by 4 amot, but in the middle of a vineyard, we're going to see the Mishnah now what the rules are. The Mishnah says, Karachat HaKerem, the law for a clearing in the vineyard. Karachat literally means a bald spot, right? So the Mishnah is saying the law for a bald spot of the vineyard, meaning, the Mefarshim explain, it's talking about an area in the middle of a vineyard that has been cleared of vines. That's called a bald spot in the vineyard. So Karachat HaKerem, the law for the bald spot in the vineyard is as follows. Bet Shammai say, Eslim be'arba amot. If there is an empty space of at least 24 amot, you are allowed to plant another species in the clearing. We do this by leaving a space of 4 amot empty next to each side of the vineyard, and then we plant the 16 amot between them. And the Mefarshim explain, if the bald spot cuts completely through the vineyard, so now it's surrounded on just 2 sides by grapevines. So Rabotai, if you would see the diagram, in the Art Scrolls diagram A, you have basically the field split into 3 sections. Section 1 is a vineyard. Section 2 is empty, completely 24 amot empty. Section 3, again, a vineyard. Now, that's the case the Mishnah is referring to. If, however, the clearing is completely inside the vineyard, so it's surrounded on all 4 sides by grapevines, that's in diagram B. Basically, you have an entire square, and in that square, you have another square that's 24 by 24 amot that's patched. That's different understandings. For the simplicity, the Art Scroll is going to explain it like diagram A, where you have 3 sections. Section 1, vineyard. Section 2, empty, 24 amot. Section 3, vineyard. So again, according to Bet Shammai, the clearing has to be 4 plus 16 plus 4, that's 24. Because you need 4 amot space for the work area. 16 you can plant, and then again 4 amot space for the work area of the vineyard. However, if the bald spot, the empty area, is less than 24 amot, that means there's going to be less than 16 amot between the 2 work areas to plant. Therefore, as a result, you are not allowed to plant anything, and we will explain that later on. Whereas Bet Hillel say, 16 amah, a clearing of 16 amot is enough. According to Bet Hillel, as long as we can plant 8 amot between the 2 work areas, that is enough. So according to Bet Hillel, the width of the bald spot has to be 4 plus 8 plus 4. 4 amot for the work area, 8 amot for planting, 4 amot for the work area, that's 16. Now, the work area that you need around the vineyard is considered part of the vineyard, meaning no other species can be planted in it, because if you do that, it'll be like you're planting it inside the vineyard. Now, since there is now a bald spot, a clearing, dividing the original vineyard into 2, each side that remains is basically a vineyard on its own, and it needs its own work area, its own 4 amot. So Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai both agree that you need 8 amot, 4 on each side, to be clear, and you cannot plant anything there. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel also agree that the area we do plant in the middle has to be large enough to be considered an independent field. If it's too small to be considered a field on its own, that's considered an extension of the vineyard and the work area next to it, where planting will be asur. What Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel disagree on is how big the area has to be considered a field. According to Bet Hillel, to be considered a field, a planted area has to be at least 4 amot wide. However, since the area being planted in the middle is sandwiched between the two vineyards, it has to be double that amount. Basically, it has to be 8 amot. So we have a field next to each vineyard. So we have the vineyard, 4 amot workspace, 8 amot field, 4 amot workspace, the vineyard. Otherwise, you would basically have... we would assign half the planted area to each vineyard, and then that would be basically neither half is large enough to be considered a field. That's why, according to Bet Hillel, they have to have a total of 16 amot bald spot, 4 on each side for separating for its work area, and then 8 in the middle, enough for 2 fields. But Bet Shammai, however, they disagree. They say that the planted area cannot be considered a field unless it's 8 amot wide. Now, since you have to have a field for each remaining vineyard, you have to double that. You have to have 16 amot. So now, according to Bet Shammai, the bald spot has to be 24 amot wide before you can plant in it. A workspace of 4 amot next to the vineyard that remains an empty area of 16 amot, which is enough to be called 2 fields, and in the middle, and then another workspace of 4 amot, and then the vineyard. Because otherwise, Rabotai, if you would just have the 4 amot instead of the double, or in Bet Shammai's case, the 8 amot instead of the double, it'll just be considered an extension of the work area and of the vineyard. It's going to be considered as if you're planting inside, so we have to make it big enough to be called its own field. That's why Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel double it, either 8 turning into 16, or 12 turning into 24, respectively. Right, Bet Shammai says 24, Bet Hillel says 16. Now the Mishnah is going to discuss a similar rule, one relating to the gap between a vineyard and the wall that surrounds it. Mechol HaKerem, the law for the perimeter of a vineyard. Now, Rabotai, this Mefarshim explain, it's referring to the empty space between the edge of the vineyard and the wall that's surrounding it. I'm sorry, but I just backtracked when I was speaking about the machlokes between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. I said you have to double it. Again, just to be clear, according to Bet Hillel, it's really 8, but you have to double it to 16 in order to have in order to have the workspace, and then the workspace on the next side, and then the 8 in the middle. And according to Bet Shammai, it has to be 24 because you have to have an area of 16, which is double the 8, 2 fields, because Bet Hillel holds a field as 4 amot. So in order to make it doubled, you have to be 8. Plus the extra 8 that you have for the 2 sides, it's 16. Bet Shammai say it has to be a field of 8 amot, and then to make it double, 16, and then 16 plus the other 4 and 4, that'll make it 24. Now about that, to move on. Again, Mechol HaKerem, the law of the perimeter of the vineyard, which we said again, it means the empty space between the edge of the vineyard and the wall that surrounds it. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, 16 amah, there has to be an empty space of at least 16 amot between the vineyard and the wall that surrounds it before we can plant another species in that area. Bet Hillel umrim, whereas Bet Hillel say 12 amah, a empty space of 12 amot is enough. Again, Rabotai, if you could see in the diagram, in diagram E and diagram F, it'll clear it up very, very much. Now, Rabotai, just a way to explain what's going on here. 4 amot has to be left empty next to the edge of the vineyard because that serves as the work area, like we explained, and you cannot plant anything there. The area beyond those 4 amot can be planted only if it's regarded as a field in its own right, or else it'll just be called an extension. However, in the case of a vineyard surrounded by a wall, the 4 amot that are closest to the wall cannot be counted as part of that field. Why? Because people do not plant within 4 amot of a wall. That was generally left empty so that people could walk there, compact the soil for the wall's foundation to strengthen it. The area that we plant with another species has to therefore be between the 4 amah work area and the 4 amah path next to the wall. So now, since it has to be considered a field on its own right, it has to be 4 amot wide according to Bet Hillel, 8 amot wide according to Bet Shammai. So the space between the edge of the vineyard and the wall has to be 12 amot wide according to Bet Hillel, because you have 4 amot to be considered a field, 4 separating from the wall and the field, 4 separating from the vineyard and the field, and 16 amot wide according to Beit Shammai, because again, 4 separating from the wall and the field, 8 amot to be considered a field, and then 4 amot to separate from the field and the vineyard. Again, Rabotai, here, really, you don't have to have the width of 2 fields like in the previous case, because there were only grapevines on one side. Here, we have the work area, but again, we're trying to make it, the reason we're doubling it is because we want to have 4 amot between the wall and the farmable area, and then 4 amot farmable area, and then according to Beit Hillel, and then 4 amot from the farmable area to the work area, whereas again, Beit Shammai say 4 amot from the path and the farmable area, which is 8 amot, and then 4 amot from the farmable area to the work area. Now the Mishnah is going to explain what does it mean karachat, what does it mean the bald spot. Be'ezoi karachat kerem, what is considered the clearing in the vineyard, the bald spot? Kerem shecharab me'emtza'o. It's talking about a vineyard that was destroyed in its middle, meaning the vines in the middle of the vineyard were destroyed or removed. So according to Beit Hillel, it's like this. Im en sham 16 ama, if there is less than 16 amot of empty space there between the rows of the vines that remain on both sides of this bald spot, lo yavi zera lisham, the grower is not allowed to bring any seeds to plant there. When we say seeds here, we're talking about species that cannot be planted in a vineyard, like grains and vegetables and the like. Hayusham 16 ama, but if there are 16 amot there between the rows of the vines that remain on both sides in the bald spot, we give the vineyard its work area, meaning we give each side of the clearing 4 amot next to the vines that are left, and you plant in the rest of the clearing, which is the remaining the 8 amot with the seeds. The Mishnah's example obviously was following Beit Hillel, because Beit Shammai would say that you have to have 24 amot. You would have to have 4 amot next to each remaining side, and then the bald spot itself would have to be 16 amot. That is the Rabotai of Mishnah Aleph. I highly encourage, if you can, to look at the Mishnah inside with the diagrams. It'll make it very clear. Mishnah Bet now is going to continue discussing what we spoke about the perimeter of the vineyard when we said the empty space between the edge of the vineyard and the wall that surrounds it. We're going to explain now a practical application, an example. Ezehu mechol kerem. What's considered the perimeter of the vineyard? Ben kerem legader. It's the unplanted area between a vineyard and the wall that surrounds it. According to Beit Hillel, the Mishnah is following the view of Beit Hillel again, it's like this. Im en sham 12 ama, if there is less than 12 amot between the vineyard and the wall, lo yavi zera lesham, again, the grower is now allowed to bring plants, he's now allowed to bring and plant seeds there. Again, the Mifroshim explain it's going based off seeds, when we refer to seeds that you cannot plant in a vineyard, like grains and vegetables, etc. However, if there were 12 amot between the vineyard and the wall, we give the vineyard its work area, meaning we leave 4 amot next to it to be empty. You don't have to leave 4 amot on both sides, because we're talking about a vineyard being only on one side. So we leave 4 amot next to it, and then you plant the rest of the space between the work area and the wall with the other seeds. And the Mifroshim explain in this case, unlike the previous Mishnah, you can plant even next to the 4 amot, you can plant in the 4 amot even. You can plant even in the 4 amot next to the wall, like the Rambam explains. However, you don't have to plant the 8 amot between the work area and the wall. If you want, you could just plant the 4 amot next to the work area. But if you want, you can plant those 4 amot next to the work area. But if you want to plant anything, you have to use the 4 amot next to the work area. Otherwise, it'll just be considered an extension of the work area, and it won't be considered a field on its own. The 4 amot next to the wall cannot be considered a field on its own, like we explained, because nobody uses that as a field. They use it as a walkway to strengthen the wall with the soil. That is the end, Rabotai, of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.